Hi and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to learn all about methods, organizing your code, and reusing some logic. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. So let's first go over what are methods. So methods are essentially a block of code designed to perform a specific task. And they're so beneficial since they allow reusability, so we can just write it once and run it anywhere. And we can break complicated tasks into more smaller, more manageable pieces. You might also hear methods called functions that are essentially just interchangeable terms. So think of it like a recipe you're cooking. The recipe has multiple steps, and maybe one step is adding eggs to the mixing bowl. So we'll make a method called add eggs and add the eggs in that. Maybe the next step is adding flour. So let's make a method called add flour and add the flour in that method. And the next step is mixing. So let's make another method called mixing and mix them there. So each step of the recipe has its own method, so we can reuse them as many times as we need without having to rewrite them. So for example, we could just call add eggs twice and it'd add 2 eggs without us having to rewrite the logic to add the egg twice. So in the example below, we can see the structure of a method. We see the return type, method name, parameters, and return value. So let's start with our add eggs method. We'll set the return type to void, the method name to add eggs, we don't need any parameters, and in the method body inside the curly braces, we don't need to return anything, so we'll just print out added eggs. The first part of a method is its return type. For the add eggs method we saw, we used void because we don't need to send any information back to the caller. We're just printing out something. But sometimes we do need to return some sort of value. For example, if we wrote a method that adds eggs and tells us how many eggs were added, you might set the return type to int and use the return keyword and send back a number. So let's look at 2 examples here. The first one is void method. We say void add eggs and we're printing out added eggs. When in the second example, we set the return type to an integer and we're printing out added eggs again, but we see the return 2 now. And when we call add eggs, it will return the number 2. Then we can just store this number in a variable. Let's just go into IntelliJ and see how we can use this. So let's go ahead and define our first method. So public static void main string args is its own method in itself. We see public, which means the function can be accessed from anywhere. We see static, meaning we don't need to make a reference to the object. We see void, because we're not returning anything. And we're seeing main, which is what the main entry point to the program is. And then string args is the arguments we want to pass into this, or the parameters. So it's important to know when defining methods, we can't define them in this main here because this itself is a method. So we have to go after this closed braces here, after public static void main, you have to say int add eggs, parentheses, open braces, and then return 3, because maybe you want to return 3 eggs. Now, if we go ahead and try to call this here, so add eggs, this here is going to give us an error. Non-static method add eggs cannot be referenced from a static context. Now, we're going to cover static in the next video, but just know for now, before this int add eggs, we have to pass in static. So now if we call add eggs, so if we go ahead and run this, we're going to see absolutely nothing come out in the console. Now why is that? Because we're not doing anything with this value. So I'm going to store the value, which returns as 3, in a variable. So int amount of eggs is equal to add eggs, and then I'm going to say system.out.println amount of eggs. And now we're going to see it returns 3. So maybe what happens if we want to return the value of 6 for 6 eggs? Well, we're going to see 6. But if we try to pass in something like a string maybe and say eggs, we're going to get an error because it's a required type of int, since we defined the type as an integer, and it's saying it got a string. What we could do though is make this a static string add eggs, store this in a string, and if we run it, we're going to see eggs. But for now, I'm just going to make this an integer and have it return 3. So what if we wanted to pass some information into our method? That's what we can use parameters for. In the example below, we have a method that adds 2 numbers together. The method looks like int add numbers. We see int a and int b in parentheses, and in the body, return a plus b. Here, int a and b are parameters. They're almost like placeholders for the actual numbers we'll pass in when we call the method. When we call the add numbers method and maybe pass a as 3 and b as 5, the method adds a and b, or 3 and 5, and returns 8. Let's just go back into IntelliJ and see how we can implement this with our egg example. So what if in here we wanted to pass in how many eggs we wanted to add? So let's add int amount, and then we'll return amount. So we're taking in an amount of eggs, and we're simply just returning that amount, and we're storing it as a variable. So now we're going to see an error here, and int amount of eggs is equal to add eggs. and it's saying we expected one argument or parameter, so I'm going to pass an arm out of 3. So now if we run this, we're going to see the exact same thing, 3, and I can just change it here. So let's make it 10, we're going to see 10. We could also return the amount plus 5. So now if we run it, we're going to see 15, maybe minus 5. We can do anything here we want. We could even do this above the return statement, so amount plus equals 7, and then just return amount. We'll see 17. So method overloading is when you create multiple methods with the same name, but you add different parameters. And then Java is going to decide which one to call based on the arguments you provided. So this lets you perform similar operations with different types of numbers or data. In the example below, we see multiple add functions. We see our int add, which takes in 2 integers and adds them together, and we see double add, which takes in 2 double values and adds them together. Then in our main method, we make an int sum integer is equal to add, and we pass in 5 and 3. And we make another variable, sum double, and we add 2.5 and 3.5, which are double values. And we print out the values. So when we call, for example, add 5 and 3, Java knows to use the integer version since we're passing in integers to the method. But if we pass in 2 doubles, Java is going to know we want to use the one that returns a double. So let's go into IntelliJ and just see how we can implement this. So I'm going to delete our egg example here, same thing here, and I'm going to make a multiply function. So maybe let's do static int multiply. I'm going to take an int a and int b, and I'm going to return a times b. Now I'm going to make a static double multiply and take in double a and double b, and return a times b. Now in our main method here, I'm going to say int multiply int is equal to multiply, let's do 8 and 9, and then double multiply double, I'm going to say equals multiply 3.2 and maybe 1.8. Now if we say system.out multiply int, same thing for double, we're going to see the overloading is working fine. And for some reason, when we run this, we're going to see the output of the double is a really weird string of zeros. There's a lot of zeros in there. Just know Java or computers aren't really good at math like this and aren't really good at doubles. So just look at the 7.56. So now it's your turn to do something. For this challenge, I want you to make a method called maxNumbered. I want you to take in 2 parameters and then return the larger of the 2. I'm going to give you a few seconds to pause the video, and then I'm going to give you a hint. So the hint is, you're going to want to use an if statement inside of the method to compare the 2 numbers. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to pause the video, and then we'll go over this solution together. Alright, so I hope you're able to get that. So all we're doing is just finding a static int max number. I'm taking in 2 integers, a, and we're saying if a is greater than b, we're going to return a. Else, if b is greater than a, we're going to return b. So now we're just printing out the max number. I put in 4 and 15, so 15 is going to print here. If I made this one maybe 19, it's going to print out 19. So I really hope you're able to get that. If you had any troubles, don't be afraid to ask me in the comments, and I'll try to reply as fast as I can. That's going to be all for this short video, but in the next video, we're going to talk more about what this static keyword means, and we're going to start to get into object-oriented programming.